Alright, are we live here? We might be. I'm not really too sure. It kind of says that I am, but I don't know if I trust it. If anybody can hear this, can you let me know if it's actually working? I'm a few minutes early, but I'm just trying to make sure it's, like, working. I guess there is some latency, so if anybody can hear me, just let me know. I'll come back in a couple minutes.
I'm still waiting for something. Leave my messages unread. Chase the feeling around my head. But I'll know when I see
Alright, can anybody hear me? Is there anybody in this room? It says there's 2 viewers. Let me know if you're actually able to hear my audio. Well, it does look like it's live. Alright, I'll start in a couple minutes. Oh, great. That's good to hear. Alright, I'm going to start in like 3 minutes. I just wanted to make sure everything is good on the audio levels. So the audio was clipping in the last video. I think I fixed that. There should also be some music playing in the background, but the idea is that both my voice and the music should be audible. So the audio was clipping in the last video. I think I fixed that. Yeah. Alright. Great, yeah, so just let me know if the audio has problems. I think I fixed all of the technical difficulties we were having in the last stream, but yeah, basically I just want to make sure everything's audible and everything like that. I do have the stream streaming at a fairly high bit rate, which should... Oh, great, yeah. Which would make sure... I'm basically just trying to make sure that the YouTube copy is at a high fidelity, but it might cause buffering for some users. I'm still kind of getting my head around all the technicalities of doing all this kind of stuff. So yeah, if it's streaming at too high of bandwidth for you guys, let me know and I can try to adjust that. But I'll start for real in like 2 or 3 minutes. Seems like the overlay isn't working. I can see it in my local copy of OBS. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I'll actually have to look into that. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around a lot of this. So I can see the text overlay. Can you guys not see that? Let me actually just check the stream. Yeah, the stream looks like it has the overlay, so I have no idea what you're talking about. Alright, great. I think I'm going to get started. I'll try to remember to keep the microphone in reasonable proximity. I think somebody just posted on Discord, which I'm not going to follow live. Chat overlay isn't working. I have no idea what that could mean because I see the overlay and somebody else sees the overlay. So, what do you mean by it's not working? The chat overlay is delayed. I actually don't know if it's the chat overlay or if it's my voice. So my voice definitely has about a 30-second overlay. There might be some delays for the actual... I'm using this Social Stream Ninja thing that somebody told me to use, and I might have it not configured right. If anybody wants to type something in as soon as you hear this and kind of give me a sense of how long the actual delay is. It's probably not anything I can really get sorted now because we are live, but I'll try to get that straightened out in the future. I just got this overlay set up like half an hour ago, so I might have configured something wrong. Yeah, if somebody has an idea of how long the actual delay is, let me know. But regardless, we're going to get started. So thanks everybody for showing up. Welcome to the stream. This should be the first in the kind of regularly occurring streams. The plan is to stream every Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. I am open to moving the time if enough people suggest doing that, but this seems like the best time that I can come up with for trying to hit as many time zones as possible. Okay, a few seconds chat overlay. That sounds great. I'm just going to roll with it then. Again, let me know if any quality settings need to be adjusted for future streams, both including audio and video. One thing to note, if you're watching this on YouTube, I am going to post a higher resolution, less compressed video, hopefully in the comments, or maybe not the comments, in the description of this video. So if you want to see what the synth is doing with less YouTube compression, check out this link that I'll hopefully have posted. It's going to be a tens of gigabytes file just because that's how compression works, but it should look a lot clearer and crisper. All right, so one thing to know, so there is a contest going on. Basically, there's only so many cool pictures of the synth that I can take myself, so I'm trying to outsource pictures of the synth, either in your studios or live, and the coolest picture submitted to me by the end of the month gets a free HDK01 glitch effect processor, which looked great with the Recursion Studio. This is courtesy of our friends over at BPMC. They've given me a device, and I'm going to be giving it to you guys. So, yeah, just email contact or Gene at Entropy & Sons or post in the gallery. But anyways, let me see if I have any other minutia to talk about before I dive in. Yeah, I think that's actually it. Yeah, it's actually a really cool device. It's circuit bending in a box. It's definitely doing crazy digital analog hybrid shit that I can't emulate on the synth like at all. So it's a really cool glitch effect processor. So yeah, literally just take a picture of your synth either in your studio or like basically anywhere that looks cool. Just be aware that I will probably repost it on social media because that's kind of what I'm doing here. Anyways, we're going to get started with the stream. The actual content of today's stream is going to be in a dive into the create view and hopefully some kind of more detailed explanation of some of the concepts like modules and patches and instruments and stuff like that. And then we'll follow it up by a Q&A. So anybody that has any questions afterwards, yeah, just let me know. So I am on this view right here just to show you that what I have plugged in. Basically, it's just video, power, and audio. I'm going to go into the audio settings to make sure that my audio levels are correct. And perfect timing for the music to stop. So I'm just going to skip to the middle of this track here. So the idea is you want your audio levels to be kind of fluctuating around this white bar, and you can adjust the gain and your input levels as appropriate. I'm not really going to get into this in any detail, but this is just the basic configuration that I have for this tutorial video or live stream. All right, so I'm going to turn off this overlay. No. All right, here. And now we have a view of the output of the synth and hopefully a somewhat legible view of the actual LCD panel. So we're going to dive into modules and the create view. So first of all, an explanation of the concept of module. So a module is the fundamental computational building block of the synth. You can kind of think of them like guitar pedals or like a Eurorack module, but they're a little more general than both of these. So modules have other modules plugged into them. They do some kind of computational function, and they have numerical parameters, and they have exactly one output. So some modules are visual effects, some modules are visual generators, some modules process audio, some modules just generate waveforms, some modules combine other modules and basically wrap them. So sometimes they process video information, sometimes they process other kind of information. It's a little more general than you might just get in a Eurorack setup or with LZX modules, but it's a similar kind of metaphor for how processing is organized in the synth. So modules are networked together, and you can't arbitrarily rewire the modules in the synth, with a few exceptions like the mixers and the modulation system, but those are pretty advanced topics. So the modules are networked together, and you can swap out modules of a similar type. And the create view kind of lets you do this. But there's a couple of things I want to kind of get into before we do that. So actually, yeah, let's just dive in here. So the create view is organized in a couple of panes. The upper right is a patch selector. Patches, which you probably know by this point, are snapshots of modules. And they are also organized in terms of instruments. So an instrument is a complete module network. So right now we're at the very top level, and we're on the FRAXTAL instrument, which is a network of about 40 modules. And all of these right here are snapshots of the entire FRAXTAL instrument. The thing is, with modules and patches, you don't need to snapshot the entire instrument. You can snapshot subchains of the instrument too. Right here, the FRAXTAL instrument, you can see it's composed of 4 module subchains, which is what these are right here. And you also see the gold selector is over the patch selector up here, which means you can scroll it with the gold knob. But we can just tap on one of these subchains and then scroll the subchain. All right, so we're scrolling through the seed subchains, and I'm actually going to get into what all these subchains are and how the instrument's organized in a moment. But the basic idea is you can just swap out one of the subchains, and now we have a different seed subchain. You can swap out the coloring subchain and just get a different color palette. The modulation system is it's definitely almost certainly the most advanced part of the synth, so unless people want me to in this video, I'm not going to dive into it. But one thing to know is that modulation means something different here than it would in an audio context, where a modulation likely just means like an LFO or something like that. This is a visual instrument, so modulation is a 2-dimensional oscillation as opposed to a 1-dimensional oscillation. All right, so modules are the basic computational units. Patches are snapshots of modules where a lot of information is actually snapshot. The numerical parameters, the settings of the modules are saved in patches, but also all of the module subchains are also saved. So when you save a module into a patch, you're snapshotting everything starting at that module. And modules are kind of designed in a hierarchy. So when you save a FRAXTAL patch for the FRAXTAL instrument, and again, instruments are complete module networks, you're actually saving all of the numerical parameters as well as all of these subchains. And in the create view, first of all, yeah, again, you see the patch selector at the top, and then some information right here, which you can tap on to get to the library interface. You can also click on expand here to dive further down into the subchains. So you see subchains keep going. So the FRAXTAL module is created from 4 submodules. One of them is the seed module, which is created from 6 submodules. And then you can dive into the texture submodule, and it keeps going even farther. There's quick navigation at the top, so you can just tap to get back there. You can tap to get back there. And a similar kind of thing works. You can swap out subchains. All right, let's go back here. So let's just go over the create view. As I've shown you so far, there is a chain selector kind of at the top. It's for navigation, and it kind of shows you where you are in the module hierarchy. There's always going to be a back button, which will take you back to where you just were. You can always get home by pressing navigation and going home. Just go back to create. So, patch selector at the top right, some information at the top left. So, one thing to know is that if you hold down the shift button, it'll actually show you which module the patch is a snapshot of. So they have the same name here. But for instance, right here you can see that these patches right here have been snapshot from the FRAXTAL module / instrument. Alright, so we're going to go, actually let's just stay right here for now. So down below here is where things start getting a little more advanced. The first tab you see is a collection of all these submodule chains that are generating this current patch. So, and again, you can tap on any of them to move the gold cursor and then scroll through them to load something new. And it will reload all of these when you do that. The next thing to see is the macros tab, which shows you what is bound to these 5 knobs. So right now we have this parameter right here is bound to this knob. It's kind of a zoom control. This is the width control. This is a opacity control, and it keeps going. And there are multiple pages. You can actually see there's a little tab block right there, which actually shows you what page you're on. There can be up to 15 total controls, macro controls per patch for 3 pages. Right now, there's only 2 pages though. And the third tab is similar to the macros tab, except it shows you what's bound to these buttons. So you see that there's a saw wave LFO bound to this parameter, which actually doesn't do too much right now. All right. So another thing to know is that you can tap on any of these and get into a detailed page about this parameter. It lets you assign modulation, lets you assign the value of the parameter if you want to actually type that in directly. You can control the sensitivity, and then it gives you information about the parameter's range. And there are also quick bindings right here if you want to create a new macro control. For instance, if you want to map this width parameter to one of these knobs, you just go in here and do that. But I'll dive into this kind of stuff maybe in the next video. And I/O will actually show you all of the controls that are currently bound. So right now we see that macro control 2 is bound to the width control. Similarly, you can tap on any of these button pads, and it will take you directly into the LFO event that this is, or LFO mapping that's hooked up to. And similarly, you can have up to 15 of these controls, but right now we only have 2 pages, and it will cycle through what's actually live right there as you kind of page through that. Alright, so hopefully that wasn't too quick of a whirlwind tour of the create page. At the bottom, you can see a save button, so this will save the entire instrument, the entire module subchain, the entire module chain based at the FRAXTAL module, which is at the very top. You can go to I/O to see everything that is currently bound to the knobs and the buttons. That can get fairly advanced, so I think I'll dive into that in a future video. And as you see, we have this gold selector on the seed module subchain. This changes to expand. If we unselect it, it goes back to being home. So this changes dynamically depending on whether you have a patch selected or if you have one of these subchains selected. You can also type, there's also a random button, so you can just randomize the entire thing, which I'll tap a couple times until it actually looks cool and we can play around with it. Alright, that's not terrible. And as you can see, there's a little, actually let me go back to the expanded view just so it's a little more visible. And as you can see, there's a little blue arrow right here, which signifies that if you press shift, you're going to get more information. Alright? Or more actions at the bottom. So the gold selector is on the seed subchain right here. So it's actually going to give you a little bit of information. This is actually kind of confusing now that I think about it, so I would recommend not doing that. You can get information from one of these patches though by going to info. So you can actually see all the tags and what the actual patch is. There's a couple of other useful things which are definitely more advanced, but you can see all the active modulation, which parameters are modulated, and what modulation channel they are associated with. And you can also see in the actual screen that there is animation, and that animation is coming from some of these LFOs. So when I randomly generated this patch, it added a bunch of LFOs to just a bunch of parameters randomly. You can go in here and modify those live if you like. So these are very useful informational panels. And if you're actually down farther in the module chain, these will actually limit the listings to things based on anything deeper in this module chain, if that makes sense. So you won't see all of the LFOs, you'll only see LFOs relevant to the seed module or any of its descendant submodules. Alright, what else do we have in here? So that is the create view. The general idea is you can start from any of these patches. And the really easy thing to do is to just swap out some of the module subchains. So we can swap out the color module subchain. We can swap out the recurse subchain. And I'll actually explain what all of these subchains and everything are in a moment once I'm actually kind of done going over the mechanics of the create UI. You see, gold selector is always either going to be on the top or on one of the bottom modules, and you can tap on it to kind of switch back and forth. And again, this gold selector just signifies what the actual gold knob over here is going to go through. So the easiest way to create your own patch is either to start from the init patch or an existing patch and just swap out some of the base level subchains. You really don't need to know too much about what you're doing, but you can pretty easily create cool stuff basically from scratch. Or if you want more advanced control, you can go into a submodule. Now we're down in the seed submodule of the FRAXTAL instrument, and you can just swap out some of these. There you go. Some of these are audio responsive. This band wave is audio responsive. It's kind of hard to see because there's a lot going on. So I'm going to swap out the texturing submodule with a generative submodule, which has less information, so you can actually see the audio a little more clearly. So we just made an audio reactive patch from scratch that nobody's ever seen, and it was basically trivial. So we will go back to the init patch, and let's talk a little bit more about macros. So as you can see, once you dive down into a submodule, this macros tab heading changes to params. All right. So the instruments themselves, the top level in the create view of the module chains, don't have any numerical parameters themselves. All of the numerical parameters are in deeper modules. For instance, the seed module has a parameter that will let you zoom the seed in and out, lets you rotate the seed, control effect amounts, and things like that. These are numerical parameters that belong to this seed module. So instead, you definitely don't want to have to dive down into the module chains in order to control the numerical parameters. So we have a macros metaphor, which is pretty similar to the macros metaphor you might come into contact with if you're playing around with like a software synthesizer, where you have just a bunch of numerical controls for your soft synth that you want to actually access at a higher level, and the higher level would be your DAW. So it's a similar kind of metaphor where there's a bunch of numerical parameters deep in the module chains, but you don't want to have to actually go down into there to actually access the parameters. So they're stored at the highest level, and the highest level is the instrument, and right here it's FRAXTAL, and we have a collection of 10 default parameters that are available for all of the FRAXTAL presets by default. You can go in and overwrite these For instance, if you're on some other patch down here and you have a different collection of controls that you'd rather have exposed at the top level, you can delete these and overwrite those and then save those bindings with the Fractal instrument. But that's a little more advanced and we'll get into. But I basically just wanted to explain the difference between macros and parameters. So macros are parameters that have been taken from deeper in the module hierarchy that have been posted at the top for easy access. And here's another useful thing to see. You can see that the color has changed on these parameters right here. This one is red, which means it is being modulated by a modulation pattern, which I'll get into later. But basically, so this is alpha, which is macro control 3. It is not going to behave as you might expect because it's being controlled by something else. Parameters are blue when they're being controlled by an LFO. So you can actually see the value change live there and there. And I believe if you go and then control the macro control, it's going to overwrite the LFO, and now the LFO is deactivated because you've taken manual control of it. When a parameter is controlled overridden by modulation, then the parameter now controls how much modulation is applied. And again, a little more advanced, but we'll get into it at some future point. So similarly, these buttons are also macro controls. So these parameters right here aren't directly in the Fractal module. These are from deeper in the module hierarchy. And for instance, this A parameter is in the seed module. All right, let's go so some quick shortcuts which are worth remembering. I think this takes you back to the init patch for the instrument. So each instrument and each module has an initial default patch, which are very useful. You're in here, shift, button press, load the init patch. All right. Now let's dive down into the seed module again. And again, we see that there are detailed parameters here. For instance, we can turn on an effect, invert. And now we go to parameters. And now knob 3 is controlling effect amount. So we turn it up. And we have enabled an effect. All right, let me think. I believe I've covered the majority of the mechanics of the Create UI. It is still a work in progress. There is a lot of complexity of the synth, and I've tried to make it as accessible and manageable as possible, but I am still iterating on the design of this page. It's very powerful, and it's kind of hard to expose all of this generality and power without like a non-trivially complex interface. But some of this is subject to change in the future. I think it's in a fairly decent spot, and once you kind of wrap your head around it, it does start making sense and is really not too hard to operate. But yeah, it is a little unusual. There's no doubt about that. Similarly to the seed chain, you can dive down into the color subchain. You can see we're down one module hierarchy. So one thing to know, patches, when you're right here, patches are basically snapshots of the entire instrument. If you're down one level in the hierarchy, snapshots are now snapshots of where you are in the module chain. So now patches do not have to be saved from an entire instrument. Oh, here's one thing to know. So current patch, it shows that we're creating a new patch, and it shows what instrument we're on. So Fractal 8 is from the Fractal instrument. Now we've just loaded something from the interference instrument, so it's actually showing us that the interference instrument is live. When we are in the seed module, just go into the texture sub module chain. So it actually shows that this patch right here is created from the GenText module. Now we have just loaded a patch from the imaging texture module. There are other modules right here. You can actually change it to get an image from the cat module. the cat texture module. This module uses the audio to generate the texture. So we can actually go in here, and now we're down in the generative texture module, and we're just going to randomize this. All right, we created something. We're going to press save. Now, it immediately takes us to the patch info page. So it shows us in particular that we've taken a snapshot of one of these submodules. It's very far nested in the module chain. So patches do not have to be solely created from instruments. Patches can be generated from any place in the module chain, and they can be loaded at will. And again, if you press shift, it'll actually show you which module actually, that doesn't seem like it's working. I think that's a bug, which I will get sorted. But the point being, patches are more general than just snapshotting the entire state of the synth. They can snapshot subchains. For instance, all of these right here are just snapshots of only the coloring submodule. You can actually tap right here to see all of them and to manage these subchains. And you can generate your own. So if you ever find a color palette that you really like, you can just save the color palette and then just reapply it for any of your other patches. All right, so I think now we're actually going to dive into a little bit of what the hell this instrument actually is. So there are 5 instruments currently on the synth. One is this one we're in right now. This is what the synth was named after. This has been in development for 20 some years and is basically why we made the synth. There's also the interference instrument, some oscilloscopes, and the cat instrument. But we're going to focus on this instrument, and I'm going to so ran when you're below the top level just randomizes that module. So we can go into color and just press ran, and now we have randomly generated color. So I think it does basically what you would expect, although it does add modulation and sometimes animation. But yeah, if you just want a random color palette, that's all you have to do. So more Cat Party. Cat Party's happening. I think I mentioned this in the last video, but I'm in the middle of updating Cat Party to be where you want to go if you just want to start from scratch. Like, let's just say you have an image you want to process and mangle, or a video stream you want to process and mangle. Cat Party will be the place to go. So right now, Cat Party is basically a cat image and some effects. And I'm updating the Cat Party instrument to be more general, so you can start from any arbitrary visual source on the synth, and there's more effects and more kind of mangling and processing that happens. And I'm expanding the modulation system because the modulation system gets really powerful. So yeah, we're gonna update Cat Party in the next couple of weeks. So if you have any more cat images, make sure to post them to the Discord, because I'm actually going to be updating the cat repository on the synth. So yeah, give me cats. Need more cats. So all right, the FRAXTAL instrument. So what the hell this thing is it's a simulation of video feedback, which I am going to show you real quick. So I have a webcam hooked up to the stream. All right, webcam. So video feedback. My screen is displaying my webcam. All right, and inside of this image, I see an image of the image as it was 10 milliseconds ago. Posted to the Discord, I will decide. So yeah, it's a recursive loop, and the FRAXTAL instrument basically is a digital simulation of this. So I'm basically zooming in and out right now, which is basically what the first knob does on the synth. So you see it's a little unstable because I'm holding a camera with my hands. But yeah, you can move it around. You can basically do this kind of stuff. So you can also wave your hand in front of it, and you kind of get a hand propagating through the system. So now we digitize this entire process on the synth. The Fractal instrument has 4 submodules. The first one is seed. Seed is extra content that gets fed into this feedback loop. For instance, the seed right now in what's actually being simulated is actually this window right here. So that's kind of what that red border is that you see. It's actually trying to simulate this. And the idea with the seed is it basically lets you like flash and get content into this feedback loop. Because if there was no actual content, then you would just get a feedback loop with emptiness. So you have to feed something in there, and that's what the seed is. The next module, recurse, is basically controlling moving the camera around. But it also adds some like symmetries and stuff like that. So the first parameter is a zoom control, and that lives in the recurse submodule chain. You can also do things like rotate the camera inside of there, move the camera left and right, up and down. But because we're digital in the simulation, we can do a lot crazier shit. And I'll actually get into that in a second. The next submodule in the Fractal instrument is the coloring submodule, which happens at the very end. So it's very important to note that the coloring submodule chain does not get reincorporated into the feedback loop. It is a post-processing effect. So there's a feedback loop, then it gets colorized with a color module, and then it gets sent out to the display. So it does not get recursed, and that's pretty intentional. It can get really crazy if you start doing that, and kind of unwieldy. The next module is the modulation module, which again, I'm not going to get into right now unless we have time at the end. But hopefully this lets you at least sort of understand what's actually happening in the simulation. So I'm going to turn this off, and we'll actually go back into the video here. All right, so again, first knob is a zoom control. It's like zooming your camera in and out. One other thing to know, I don't know if you guys know this, but you can hold down the shift button right here, and you see that you temporarily move the macros and the buttons to the second page. So you don't actually have to go into here and actually click on this arrow. You can be anywhere and then just hold shift, and then you get a completely different set of controls. Same thing with the buttons. And also, just so you know, if you go into the second page here and then leave, you have now changed what's on these knobs and on these buttons. You have to actually go back in here and change the page again to get back to what you might expect. Another thing to know, these knobs are all buttons. Tap them down to reset. There's actually a little context menu that shows up when you tap the knob down. You can scroll over to info to get to quick information about the parameter and change the modulation. So you can have up to 3 pages, but by default, there are only 2 pages. If you want to add more, you are definitely welcome to, but yeah. If you're on the second page and there is a third page, shift will expose the third page. If you're on the third page and you press shift, it'll go back to the first page. So it hopefully behaves how you'd expect. But yeah, there are only 2 pages of controls by default. So yeah, let's reset everything. And like I was saying, the seed module basically controls what gets fed into the simulation. So right now we have a red border which kind of simulates a TV screen or a display screen. The seed module has a bunch of submodules. The first one, actually the texture one, is probably the easiest to explain. No hardware shortcut to get to the third page of the level. That is correct. There is not one. So here's another useful feature of the Create view. That would be useful. I'll make a note to look into that. If I have time, that's the kind of thing that seems like it should be useful. Although there might be a better use for double pressing these buttons and doing something, but I don't really know. So let me go back to the zoomed in view. So something useful. If you're down farther in the module hierarchy, you can press shift and you'll get a little preview button right here. This lets you view these module subchains in isolation. So we can see what the seed module is generating completely on its own. No feedback or anything like that. So this is the seed. This is the information that's being fed into the recursive system on each cycle of the recursion. And there is one of these little previews for each of these modules. So like I said, here, the recurse module is basically like your camera settings plus some kaleidoscoping settings. And you can do the same thing. You can preview it to actually get some idea of what is going on with the camera. It's a little hard to make sense of, but for instance, this kind of shows you how the screen is bent totally in isolation. And if you turn that off, you can kind of see that the actual simulation is following this pattern. Similarly, for the modulation module and for the color module, all of these submodules will give you a little preview, which is super useful for kind of understanding what's happening in isolation. But let me go back and reset this. So, the seed module generates a shape. The shape has some amount of transparency. We see that there is kind of like a border and a transparent region. The transparent region is where you see the other levels of the recursion. And there is an alpha parameter in a different module that kind of lets you control that blending factor. So the seed module right now is just generating this, where the black region is transparent, and it's generating it by generating a shape, which is this border module. We can change it to just be parallel lines. We can change it to be kind of like a cross in the middle. We can change the shape just to be one line. We can change the shape to be a circle. If you dive into the shape, you'll get a parameter control for the width. You can also even make it a torus, although it's kind of glitchy. So you define a shape for the seed, which by default is border because it looks the most like a TV. And you can also control the color or what's being textured onto the shape. Right now it's being created generatively by just creating a solid red source. You can also change it to be an image, which we can choose from the image library. If you have, you can specify like an HSV value, an RGB value, just solid. I think those are new. You can use a video camera to texture it. There's a bunch of options. Like I showed you, you can use the modulation patterns to texture. You can use the cat to texture. You can use the oscilloscopes as a texturing source. Right now, I think it's just generating some waveforms on its own. Yeah, image texture, which I think you may or may not be familiar with. If you go into expand, you can see that we have a big bank of all of our image presets. So the basic idea behind the seed is that it uses a shape and a texture, and it generates a shape with some transparency and then textures it. And then on top of that, it adds a bunch of effects. You can tap right there just to go back to this module. One of the cool things you can do, you can use the entire output of the synth as the texture, and you get another level of recursion there. So you can see on top of this little border we've just generated, it's actually using the final output of the synth. But we're just going to stick with the basic. Oh yeah, something to also know. These FFT textures are using the audio source to actually generate some content. So it can definitely look fairly cool. We're going to go back to the generative texture. And again, you can dive down into here, and you have a bunch of options for how the texture is being generated. So it's just generating some patterns. And there's some more advanced ones that actually let you go in and create like weird grid effects and shit like that. That's the one we just created earlier. All right, so we're going to go back to here. So there's a couple other modules in here. The stripe is a fixed function effect. We'll skip that real quick and actually just go to effect. Right now there is no effect on. We're going to go to the saturate effect, because why not? And then we're going to go to parameters. So see on the seed module, there's a couple of pages of parameters which control all aspects of the seed. The one right here is turning the effect on, which doesn't do anything with this effect. Let's go to... There we go. So now this knob right here is controlling the effect amount. All right, so these are organized kind of poorly, but these A and B parameters right here control the position of the seed. This is zooming the seed in and out. This is rotation on the seed. These scroll the seed left and right. But note that there is some symmetry that happens on the seed that I think is impossible to turn off. I'm not entirely sure. So you see when you kind of zoom in and out, it creates symmetric copies of it. When you rotate, there's a mirror symmetry in the middle. I should probably make it so you can turn that off. But at the moment, it is permanent. So height has to do with a fake lighting effect. So you want to turn off all the lighting, you turn the height all the way down. You want maximum fake lighting, you turn it all the way up, and now it looks like the seed is like an actual triangle. So flat, triangle. All right. We can move the texture around with a second collection of controls. Zoom the texture in and out, rotate the texture, move it left and right. So, almost. So the fold happens for the entire recursion. The symmetry I'm talking about happens only for the seed. Actually, it's not even displaying the symmetry in this preview, which is kind of... Actually, you might be right. That symmetry that we're seeing might come from the fold. I think that's actually right. I'll have to look into that, or we can figure that out in a second, but... Alright. Go back to generative texture. So we have an effect. We have a stripe, which it's kind of hard to explain, but it's easy just to play around with to kind of get some sense of what's happening. So the stripe creates a little transparent region inside of the shape generated by border. These transparent regions are generated by the audio. So this is a really cool way to get audio in. There's some that are hooked up to the CV inputs, but this is just a basic one. So this just has like a little transparent region that's right in the middle of it, and it's kind of colored white as well. So it's basically just a fixed function effect that always involves transparency. You can dive down in there and get in and control the stripes parameters, but I'm not going to dive too far into it right now. There's a bunch of stuff you can do in there. So right, you can see it's just like a little region has been taken out of the border that has been made transparent, and you can go in and control that in detail. These you don't really need to understand. You can just play around with them and just see what happens, basically. This one controls the shape a little bit. This controls some transparency. And this is, there's a lot of waveforms that live throughout the synth, and this place definitely exposes them. Some of the waveforms are audio reactive, some are CV reactive, some are just like normal cosine waves and stuff like that. And like I said, this is actually a fairly cool looking seed, so we could definitely just go and save the entire thing. And now we have seed 41. We can just pull it up later. And again, you can tap on the library to see all the seeds that have been saved. Some of them respond to video in the library, some respond to CV, some respond to audio. So this is one of the key ways of integrating your external signals in with a synth. So there's a like I mentioned, all modules, because we're in the seed module, all modules have an init patch, which in this is just a red square. Some of the seeds have explicitly been designed to respond to audio, like this one.
Remember how you told me about lightning?
Or this one. Or this one.
All those things that you told me.
A couple of them respond to CV, and a couple of them respond to video as well. Alright, so that is it. Hopefully a somewhat coherent explanation of the seed module. One other thing to know, I don't know if you guys know this, but the help is very comprehensive. Help will give you a definition of all these kind of terms. It has links in it and everything. You can also long press on anything to actually get an explanation of what's going on. So the seed, this is telling you all about what the seed module is doing. You can long press on the params text, and it should... Well, maybe that one doesn't have any help info. You can long press on the buttons text. You can long press on the inputs, and it'll tell you all about module inputs. So I don't know if you guys have looked at it, but the user manual is 80 pages, and the vast majority of it is on here, and it will give you information about all these modules. So, next, we will go into the recurse module. Like I said, actually, let's go back and reset the patch. All right, so I'm going to take a break for about 60 seconds, and then I'll be back. All right, I'm back. Actually, before I dive into the recurse module, I want to talk about the default macro controls. All right, my mouse is stuck. There we go. So, Fractal Instrument init patch, tab on macros. So the recurse module does two things. It controls the camera, actually three things. Or two, it doesn't really matter. Controls the camera, and it also controls how the seed is blended into the recursion. The C0 parameter is in the recurse module, and is basically a zoom control for the camera. This width parameter is the width of the border, and it is deep down in the module chain. It is, well, maybe not super deep, 2 levels down. But this hopefully should explain the idea of these macro controls. You don't want to have to dive down all the way into this module in order to get this width control. And it's super important because it controls how much information is being fed into the recursion. There's also an alpha control, which is down in the recurse module. It controls the opacity of the seed, how much of the seed is blended in with the recursion on each iteration. These controls right here are color controls, and they live in the color module. On the second page, it's these C0, C2, C4. These are controls for the recurse module, and these are seed controls. This controls the angle of the seed, and this controls the offset. So, brief overview of what these controls are doing. Back to the seed module, or the recurse module. So, you can see it has 4 submodules and a bunch of parameters. These are fairly non-descriptive, largely because they are just coefficients in mathematical equations, and short of actually just telling you a bunch of equations, they're fairly meaningless. But you can also see that there's a bunch of dots. So this is kind of confusing, admittedly, but some parameters are one-dimensional, which is just a number. Some parameters are two-dimensional, which, if you remember your high school math, are complex numbers or points in a plane. And R is basically the magnitude, which controls, like, for instance, the zoom of your camera. And then TH is an angle, short for theta. I still want to come up with a better way of handling that kind of stuff, and I haven't come up with one yet, but hopefully I will one of these days. So I'm going to turn this off real quick. I'll explain what I actually did in a moment. See, now it's just like we were rotating the camera when we were playing around with things. So, bunch of numerical parameters. On the end of the third page, you can see there's an alpha control, which is where... Oh, whoops. Wait, what? Oh, never mind. Which is where that macro control stored in the instrument comes from. and there's an effect amount. So there's 3 places in this instrument where there are effects. There's an effect in the seed module, which only affects the seed. There's an effect here, which gets composed with itself because it's in the middle of a feedback loop. And there's also an effect in the color module, which is a post-processing effect, so it has no effect on the recursion. And this is an effect amount. Right now there's no effect, so nothing is really happening. But for instance, let's turn on the invert effect. And it's getting inverted on every cycle. Which is, yeah, you can see the, whoops. The color gets inverted, then it gets uninverted, then it gets inverted, then it gets uninverted again. And then it changes to yellow and green from the coloring post-processing. Which, let me turn that off. Just completely no color processing happening. There you go. You see there's a little bit of a rotation coming in from one of these parameters. I don't even know. So the modules that generate the recurse module, there's 4 submodules. One of them is controlling the symmetry. Actually, where are we? We're on the 3rd page of controls. So you see there's a mirror symmetry in the middle. This is called the kaleidoscoping module, and it gives you various collections of symmetry. Now we're going to have 4-fold symmetry. 3-fold symmetry, and so forth. And then there's some weird symmetries which are kind of hard to explain. But again, you can always go in here and preview and to kind of get some idea of what this module is actually doing. So this is how it's distorting like a normal like XY grid. So there's an effect which hopefully should be somewhat explanatory. There is also a blend mode. So anybody that's familiar with like Photoshop blending should have some, oh, this is got way too much going on. Should have some idea of what's actually going on here. So when I put this knob down, you see levels of the seed start blending, or levels. It makes that border that was generated from the seed module transparent, so you can start seeing underneath of it. This blend mode controls how the layers are blend with each other. There's a couple of different options, and they're basically ripped straight out of Photoshop. Some of them look all right. Some of them are kind of hard to operate, but it's another thing you can play around with. I almost always just keep it on alpha blend, but it can definitely be interesting. So, like I was saying, in a normal feedback loop with a camera, there's only a couple things you can do with a camera. You can zoom it in and out, you can rotate it, and you can move it left, right, up, down. But because we're in a digital world, we can do all kinds of crazy shit, like just bend the screen. And this basically starts adding math into the equation. So each one of these func z's is basically just a mathematical equation that determines how the screen is bent. You can kind of actually see in the preview a little bit of what's happening here. So the init one, absolutely nothing is going on. Just a normal grid. This one right here is just a rotation of the grid. This one starts bending the grid. And this is why it looks like fractals sometimes, because this is the same math that is used in generating like the Mandelbrot and the Julia sets. And once you have one of these math equations selected, that is when all of these C parameters start doing weird stuff. These all look kind of similar in this one, but yeah, this one's now doing whatever that is. And you can turn off the preview, and you can see all kinds of levels of fractally goodness. You also will notice that it's not colored because we turned off all of the coloring operations in the color module just to get a raw sense of what's actually happening here. And yeah, you can go in and change the math equation. This can take some finesse to actually operate in a sane way. So I normally leave the majority of them at their default values and then just play around with one or two of them if I'm trying to do something interesting. See, there we go. Oops. And now you can do this to control this angle. You got a zoom right there. Now we got a whole bunch of feedback. You can go in here and just mess around with things, but you need to be kind of careful or else you'll just get into like weird shit. So hopefully that is some explanation of what's happening in the recurse module. The idea is there's a kaleidoscoping thing, which is now going to add some symmetry, but it actually destroyed all the cool mathiness. So it's cool to turn it off sometimes. There's a blend mode, there's an effect, and then there's just some math. So this is basically a very fancy mathy camera with some Photoshop blending stuff. Now we'll go into the color module. So the color module is created from 3 submodules. There's a post-processing module, which is basically like a fancy effect. There's an effect, and then there's lighting. So each level of recursion does in fact take 1 frame of video. It takes 1 frame of the seed. So the seed's being generated at the frame rate of the synth, and each frame of the recursion takes 1 frame of the seed, where the seed can be generated from video, it can be generated from the texture library. But that's basically correct. So we're down to the color module. And like I was mentioning, the coloring does not get fed back into the feedback. It happens at the very end, right before display. So the first thing we'll do, we'll just turn on the effect. So this is just an invert effect, which just inverts the colors. And we can just change that to something. That looks nice. There's also a post-processing effect. So, and there's a bunch of parameters too. So, right now in this visualization we have going on, you can see that there's a bunch of levels of the recursion. As I zoom in a little bit more, we see a bunch of iterations going on. We can change the coloring to based on the iteration level. So this post function right here is basically like an effect which takes the recursion depth into account. You see now as you go down in the recursion, the effect changes what it's actually doing. This depth scale control right here controls that. You turn it off, you get no recursion based effect or no recursion depth based effect. You make it slight, you see the effect basically happens a little bit the farther you go down in recursive layers. You can turn it up, just kind of see that increasing. And this is one of the macro controls. It's the last macro control on the first page because it's really, really useful to actually kind of highlight the depths of the recursion. Hue offset is literally just goes from red to green to blue. It kind of rotates around the hue wheel. So instead of red, or instead of this color, you just use a different basis color. It's not doing anything, it's just shifting the hue by a set amount. Effect amount, post-processing amount controls how much of this post-processing effect to use. So none, all of it. Fade, fade out, self-explanatory. And again, you can tap on any of these to get some explanation, or you can hold down on it to get help. You got actual final post-processing color levels, red, green, and blue, for instance. has absolutely nothing to do with the color, but I don't know a better place to put them. But there's also these mod controls, which give you a final camera control. Final zoom out. Final pan left to right, up, down, that kind of stuff. All right. Same thing, you can dive down in each of these modules. You get a collection of all the snapshots. You can just randomize the post-processing library if you want. There is also a lighting model. So we see right now, everything looks kind of flat. The synth has... Oh, it's kind of hard to explain. They're definitely not coloring, but I really don't know where else to put them. They operate at the very, very end of the processing chain, at the same place that the coloring processing happens structurally. So they kind of live there by default, but they really don't go there. They don't belong there, but they're going to stay there for the moment. Anyways, there is a fake lighting effect that happens here, which we have just turned on. Should be pretty obvious. No light, light. And there is a lot of stuff going on inside of here. There's a bunch of controls, which I'm not going to go into, but the basic idea is you can just mess around with them and it looks cool. But you can really see the lighting effect like actually working by moving the light around. Alright, so that is a whirlwind overview of the color module. I'm not going to go into the modulation module, but I will let you know that you can really easily... This is the recommended way of integrating like audio and video with a patch. You just go and load modulation audio. Now we have an audio reactive patch. And now I'm going to add some animation. And there we go. Now we've made something cool. So... amount of feedback is kind of the wrong way to think about it in general. You only have... So it's not like there's a dry-wet mix, where dry is just a signal and wet is like mixing into feedback. You can... There's basically a mix control for the seed into the feedback. Yeah, I'll save it. And that's the alpha control. So this is, given the way it's designed, this is what you get. You have the transparency control. So we're mixing none of the seed into the feedback loop. And now we are mixing all of the seed except these naturally transparent regions in the feedback loop. So it's this alpha control in the recurse module. But yeah, it's not like an amount of feedback control. I think that's a slightly wrong way to think about it. But anyways, I think that's it for what I have scheduled to go over today. So now I'm more than open to QA. If you guys have any questions or anything in particular that you want me to go over, or if you want me to dive into any more of the advanced features, I'm happy to. So I got another amount of time scheduled, so just let me know. I can also just sit here and fidget and make something else cool, which is, I guess, what I will do unless somebody has any suggestions. Yeah, so macros, there are a bunch of ways, or a couple of ways to save them. So by default, they're all stored with the instrument, and you can modify the macros by modifying the macros for the instrument and init patch. So that basically controls the default macros for the entire instrument. So we have the init patch right there, and it has macros stored with it. And you can modify those, and it will change the macros for anything, any Fractal patch that doesn't have its own macros. So you can also load just a different patch, and you can save macros directly with that patch. If you do that, it's going to override the instrument macros for that patch. And then there's also a global macro control, and those macros are available always or in the perform mode, and it's a little complicated, which I'm going to go over this I think in the next video, because the next video is going to be all about IO mapping, like macro controls and all this kind of stuff in the mapping editor, because I think that's probably the most confusing part of the synth beyond the create mode. That and maybe the modulation system. Another handy feature, so you might have seen me doing this in the video. Actually, let me go. Yeah, I'm actually going to see on this too. So you see I'm down 3 levels of the module hierarchy. I'm actually in the texturing submodule of the seed submodule of the Fractal instrument. And it has its own parameters. Actually, this one doesn't actually have any parameters. There's no parameters here. But the instrument has its own macro controls. You can hold down navigation and actually access the instrument macro controls. So this is going to be the zoom control, this is going to be the width control. So no matter where you are in the module hierarchy, you can always get the macro controls by holding this down. Super useful. For instance, I'm just going to make it transparent all the way from deep down in here. All right. Also, there's navigation buttons. Navigate. You can create your own bookmarks just by tapping bookmark, and it will basically lock in any part of the UI to one of these buttons. So this takes you immediately to the texturing module, which will let you swap in a camera or swap in do the mod X and mod Y in the post color selection ignore the camera settings in the recurse model? Yes. So there's the camera settings in the recursion, which are basically controlling the camera for the feedback loop. Mod X and Mod Y happen all the way at the very end. They're not reintegrated back in the feedback. It's basically just taking the entire screen and moving it left or right or zooming in and out. Has no further downstream effects. Actually, let me go and turn on a stripe. Let's get some audio reactivity going. Actually, I think I'm going to get audio activity from a different source. I'm going to put in audio activity through this module right here. All right. First navigation takes you to the texturing submodule of seed. Second navigation takes you to the recurse module, and these are by default. Next navigation takes you into the color module, the modulation module, and the library. For instance, if you're like in the perform mode and you want to control the coloring, that's modulation. Go to the modulation, just type that, tap that. Now we're gonna play around with the recurse module. First, play around with the symmetry. That's pretty cool. Hold down navigation to get the zoom control. let's turn an effect on. I think that. Right. Yeah, it's super handy. I actually want to make it so that you can have like a further page of bookmarks by holding down navigation and tapping one of these, because it is, I use it basically regularly to go and create stuff. Oh, that's a lot. Hey, that looks nice. All right, let's play around with the blending mode. I don't even remember. Like half the times, like there's shit on here which is literally just an equation, and I have absolutely no idea what to call it, so I just come up with something stupid. What's it actually doing? It's been multiple years since I came up with that. That's scrub right there. I mean, like, what the hell else am I gonna call that, you know? Pull through your webcam and add effects to that. Yeah, I have to go grab a webcam. I'll do that right now. I'm gonna finish working on this patch. Actually, yeah, let me finish working on this patch, and then I'll grab a webcam. But yeah. All right, so this looks kind of cool. Last step is just to go into the color module. I think the colors already look pretty good, but actually, let me turn up the lighting effect, which is weirdly in the seed. Whoa! What? That was not expected. That is way too much. Turn it off. How about that? Nah, just a little bit. Alright, zoom to the color module. Let's change this guy. I think that could actually be cool if it was tamed down a little bit. So, I'm gonna go and just turn down like the green level. Actually, let's do that in the lighting model instead. There's two places to change the color. So you can change the color of the light, and you can change a final output filter. It can look a little different depending on which one you choose. All right, we've made a patch. All right, let me go grab a web camera. I'll be back in about 60 seconds. Back with a web camera. And also, if anybody else has any questions or any ideas of what you want me to cover, I still have another like 15 minutes or half an hour. Just let me know. Give me a second. All right, so we're going to go back to the init patch. I'm going to plug in a web camera. So it's not 100% recommended to plug in web cameras and cameras when the thing is live. And also, it's unfortunately worth me pointing out that the video input system is kind of janky. And if you plug cameras in and out while the thing's live, it's going to crash it eventually. I am working on that. But it's a pretty serious rewrite of the video input system. Let me also check my hard drive real quick to make sure I have enough space. I'm just going to assume that I'm fine. All right, so we have a camera plugged in. And there are several ways to integrate the camera. There's two really easy ones. So first is to press navigation, first button, to go to the texturing library. And then just click video texture 1. And you see that there are 4 video cameras slots. Right here, there are 4 video texture modules. Each one is using one of the different slots. So now our web camera is being used as the texture source for our seed, right? So there's that. And I believe this will just reset to the init patch. You can also go in here and load one of the video specific modulation patterns. Now the camera is being overlaid on top of the simulation. Now, so this is using the camera in the feedback loop. If you just want to literally use the synth as a video effect processing unit, there are a couple of ways of doing that. The idea is that when I update the cat party instrument, that will be where you go to do that. Actually, yeah, let's just do it this way. So we're going to load the init patch. We are going to make sure transparency is all the way up. And we're going to go into the seed module. For the shape, we are going to use solid. This is 100% solid seed. And it is now just It's not transparent in any way, so it's just painting a straight up image, red solid image onto the screen. Now we're going to select the camera. So we have camera that's just being put on there, and we have a couple of things that are happening. We have some effects that are happening, which we'll just turn off in the color module. So now there's no colorizing effects. And we also have the kaleidoscoper, which is creating the bilateral symmetry. Now we're literally just displaying what the camera is pointed at. That's all we're doing. And yeah, the seed does add a little bit of symmetry on its own, like kind of around the borders of the texture, which you can't really turn off. But you can go in here and zoom the camera in and out. You can rotate the camera and things like that. Now, if you want to use an effect, you turn on the effect amount, and then you actually have to select an effect. So, yeah, let's just point it right there. So now we just change the color of the camera. See, camera effect. Yeah, here's something else you might want to do. You can get rid of the symmetry by going into the recurse module and making sure this is down to 1. There you go. Now we're just 100% changing the camera. You can also like flip the camera left and right, or mirror the camera if you want to do that, which you can do by going into here. Yeah, and like, so we have this set up, so you can literally just go here and save it, and then you have like just camera effect at your fingertips. There's a couple other ways you can do it. You can use like the mixer effect in any of the modules to just mix in the raw camera source. You can do that in the cat party, for instance. Let's just show you how you do that. So check this out. Cat party. All right. Go into the party submodule, which right now is just 2 effects. For the first effect, we are going to switch to the mixer. And we're going to make sure both of our effects are on. For the mixer, fine. I will dive into that question in a second. Let me just demonstrate how to use the mixer real quick so I don't get distracted. All right, so right now we have the cat party instrument, which is this cat, and it has an inversion effect on it. For the mixer, we're going to select video buffer 1, and we're going to turn the mix all the way up. So now we literally just have the video source completely overriding the actual cat. And now you can just go in and play around with this effect. And this is kind of the inspiration for the cat. Ooh, that looks fucking cool. This is kind of the inspiration for the cat party update because people are already going in here and doing this. And I'm just going to make it easier. Studio. Cool picture. All right. Anyways, so that is basically how you use the cat party instrument to do something that the cat party instrument was not designed to do. You could actually add a second mixer here, and then you could use the cat party instrument to blend between 2 video sources. Now, so the question was about lighting. Moody scenes. Yeah, you can, well, if you use the cat party instrument, actually I probably should have saved that. So you can always use CV to control anything. The Cat Party instrument has its own collection of parameters. It has like the mix control, the effect amounts and stuff like that. You took the CV up to that. I don't think it will do anything with a CV automatically. I think you have to go in there and wire it. But we're going to get into that kind of stuff next week. So, light source appears on an area of the screen when there's no other content there. Trying to digest this real quick. All right, so you want to use the light source in scenes that are kind of dark. And it looks bad for a lot of your circumstances. I guess I'm having a hard time exactly understanding what you mean. If you want me to dive into that to some detail, if you want to ever take like a picture of the synth when it's doing that, I can look into it. Besides that, I'm not entirely sure what you're getting at with the moody scenes and the light source. You can also try to just elaborate, and maybe I'll come up with some thoughts that are useful. Okay, well, so you can turn down a lot of that stuff. Yeah, so I think, here, let me actually try to understand. So I believe that's caused by one of the lighting controls. Let me see if I can actually try to recreate that. Let me think about it real quick. Let me actually just find a patch that's kind of dark, kind of black inherently. Oops. I think I know what you're talking about, and I think I have some suggestions to turn that down. So a lot of this excessive whiteness here, is that sort of similar? I think it's related. I think if you go into the color module and then go down into lighting, there's lighting controls you can control right here. Right now they're modulated, so we'll demodulate them. But I believe it's like the specular control that's generating. It's either the specular or the diffuse control that's generating that white stuff. And you can just turn it down. It's still white. It's not as shiny. Let me try to find a different patch. Yeah, so you cannot override the init patch, unfortunately. I have thought about trying to... Yeah, so... I have this whole scheme in mind that I haven't got around to, where the plan is for when the synth crashes, which I'm going to make it not crash ever at some point. But before I get to that point, I'm going to try to implement a scheme where when the synth crashes... It holds the current image on the screen. It just kind of freezes for a second. And then when it reboots, it restores exactly where it was. So it shouldn't crash. It should just freeze up for a second. And that should be the worst case scenario once I actually get this scheme implemented. But I have not gotten around to it because I got a lot of shit going on. Well, the idea is sometimes the synth crashes and it restarts on the init patch, which isn't necessarily what you want, particularly in a live performance. But also, like I said, I am going to look into why your synth is crashing. If I can't figure it out this week, I will literally replace your synth, which might be useful anyways, because then I'll have your synth in front of me to actually figure out what the hell the problem is. There's only like 2 possibilities, I think. Either you have some peripheral that's behaving bizarrely, which I can possibly rule out, or there's like some hardware glitch with your synth, which has happened to a few of them before. And that is worth me taking a look at in detail. So I'll get that sorted for sure. But the idea is, hopefully by the end of the year, when the synth crashes, it will just pick up where you left off, and there should be minimal interruption on the screen, because crashing during a live performance is just not acceptable. Yours was damaged in transit, you think? Booting up with specific tags enabled would be great. That's actually a great idea. I will add a setting. I'm going to make a note of that right now. I'm going to add a setting, maybe even in the next release, which basically will persist your tag selections when you reboot, which should be exactly what you want. And I might be easy enough to make another setting while I'm at it that lets you select the init patch. It's not going to overwrite the init patch, but it's going to you'll be able to specify what patch it loads on boot. Let me make some notes for this stuff real quick. Oh shit. Yeah, that is unfortunate. You were in the beta test group, so there was definitely some shipping issues with that stuff a lot. Yeah, well, so if your frame is bent, just let's chat offline. Maybe I'll just go ahead and swap your synth out. It might be easier for me to debug it anyways. Or we can chat offline about that. Alright, I'm going to try to find some more dark patches, because got it. I'll get that sorted. Anyways, quality apology. Let's just give you this advice. So what I think you want to do is to go into the lighting module in the coloring sub module, and then just play around with the first couple of settings. Something will probably get you closer to what you would like. It's probably either the specular. So right now you see there's a bunch of whiteness. I'm turning up and down with this specular control. Specular is basically how shiny it is. So you might just want to dial that down. So next time that happens, that would be my advice. There's also a shininess control, which is a slightly different control of the shininess. All right, well, if nobody has any further questions or anything like that, I think I'm just going to call the stream for today. So I really appreciate all you guys coming by. I hope it made sense. We're going to do this again next week. So if you have any questions in the meantime, or any particular topics you want me to cover next week, just let me know in the Discord server. Just a reminder, there is a contest for the HDK01 glitch effect processor. To enter the contest, just send me a picture of your synth, either in your studio or out in the field being used, and that is the entry for the contest. So, and yeah, like I mentioned a couple times, the plan for the stream next week, I am generally going to go over input configuration, like CV and MIDI and that kind of stuff, because I think that is definitely one of the areas of the synth which is still a little confusing to people. So yeah, again, thanks for coming by, and I'll hope to see you all again next week.